Hello and welcome back to Woollen Hearted. My name is Fran and I'm filming this in my workroom in my house in the southwest of France in the Pyrenees Mountains. Thank you for coming and joining me again today. As you can see, I'm back at my spinning wheel, and when I was last here I had been spinning up some British wool. So the first yarn was some Jacob, which I'd spun from combed top, and I also spun some Exmoor horn. But today I am spinning some French wool. You may have seen in my last episode that I was knitting the first of a pair of socks. So this is the first one, and I've almost finished the second. So I've turned the heel, I've done the instep creases, and I'm now just working on the foot, and I think in the next couple of evenings that will be finished. And this is a yarn, a DK wet yarn that is from Brittany. So Brittany is in the northwest of France. It's naturally grey yarn, although it's really, I'd call it a dark brown. And this is wool from sheep who live on the island of Ouessant, which is in the Atlantic Ocean, just off the coast of Brittany, to the west of the city of Brest. And as I explained in my last podcast, the sheep there are in French called mouton de Ouessant, sorry. So sheep from the island of Ouessant. There is also a breed of sheep called Ouessant, and they are the sheep that were taken to the mainland and that survived improvements to the breed. Or I say improvements, probably from a meat perspective it's more interesting, but for the breed it changed the breed quite radically. And so today I'm spinning some combed fleece in a lovely natural black colour, because this is the true colour of the traditional Ouessant sheep. And this is this is carded fleece that originally I bought in a batt. This was the size of the fleece because Ouessant sheep are absolutely tiny, and I've stripped this down already once and made some little kind of is it roving? Is roving carded, or is it sliver? Excuse me. Just some lovely light hairy strips to spin from, and I'm spinning woolen long draw, which is my absolute favourite way to spin. Very different from the worsted draw that I used to make this yarn. And although I can't show you yet, the finished yarn is hopefully going to be much more reminiscent of what's in this ball, so very light and airy and fuzzy. This ball of yarn is very much my inspiration for this project. There we go. If you compare it to the combed top that was then worsted spun, which is very silky and smooth and regular, it's quite a contrast. And this kind of spinning and this kind of yarn is very much my favourite kind. So yeah, the idea is I'm hoping this time that I will end up with a DK weight to knit with, and my intention is to make more socks. So I'm not entirely sure if this was the full fleece. It felt a bit small when I got it out of my bag earlier on. I suspect I have already spun a little bit with this one, so as I probably won't have enough to make a full pair of socks with just the black, or I suspect I won't have enough, I've actually pulled out another batt, which you can see if we compare is much bigger, so that would have been a full fleece. This is also Ouessant, although this is white, and this came from the same producer. So back in Brittany, when we lived there, I was invited to participate in a wool festival in central Brittany back in the summer of 2008, and I went with my spinning wheel and I went with some hand-spun yarn, hoping to sell some things. I think I ended up selling one skein, which just paid for my fees for being a stall holder. And then I ended up spending a little bit of money because it was just too tempting to leave things behind from the other stall holders. And one of the people up there was a guy who is quite famous in France because he has a carding machine and a felting machine, and so he's a sheep shearer. He has his own quite large flock of Ouessant sheep, and he cards people's wool locally. He's not a mini mill, but he's sort of quite small, so he's able to scour and card into batts quite small quantities of wool, and then he makes it into felt. So quite a few artisans, craftspeople in France, even people all the way down here in the south, will go to him and with his help make felt on his machines. And I've got an example here that I bought. So this is very thick felt using local sheep breeds, and for example this is an offcut from a very large piece of felt that I purchased from the couple who had the stall next to me, and they are shepherds, transhumant shepherds. So they have a flock of Belle-Île and Landes-de-Bretagne sheep, and transhumance in French and English is a type of shepherding where your flock has no fixed abode and you move them around on foot traditionally. So he guards his sheep in southern Brittany around the area of Carnac, which is a very beautiful popular spot for tourists to go to, with some ancient standing stones. And so this was blanket from his, or fabric from his flocks, and he was selling it as blankets, and I bought some to use as projects. And you may have heard me talking in my last podcast about wanting to make a wool cushion to keep my bottom warm when I'm sat knitting, keeping an eye on my own little lambs, my two children. So at some point very soon I'm going to use some of this fleece to make a cushion. But I know people, I have friends from the spinning guild that I was a member of who were there on the day, and they were buying it to make into wool coats, into cushions, into skirts and shift dresses. So the possibilities are endless. And I've also stayed in a yurt here in the Pyrenees that was made by the owner, by the dad of the family we stayed with, and he went all the way up to Brittany to make his yurt at this site. So he made the felt with the help of the man, and then he constructed the yurt up there, and I think he said he used Texel and Corsican fleece. So the Corsican wool is very, very strong and rustic and yeah, very resistant, and I think would make a fantastic yurt. So yeah, that's sort of the story of all this wool that I came back with. And I bought, I think, 3 carded batts from him, and just I have used some of it but didn't get around to using it before we moved back down here to the Pyrenees. So my idea is to fill up as many bobbins full as I can with the black, and then when I've done that I'll match the amount with the white, and then I'll ply them together because I feel like making a marled yarn. I think that would be really nice. But I love this carded batt because I mean, it's still got leaves and lots of grass and hay and straw in it, and yeah, it just feels like a very minimally processed product, But as a spinner, sometimes I find it's hard for me to do all the wool processing myself. It is something I love to do. I love hand carding with carders, making row legs. I also have a drum carder, and I find that really fun to use as well. But carding, whether you use drum carder, dog cards, dog brushes or hand cards, is quite physical, it's quite laborious, it's quite time consuming, and spinning itself is already quite a laborious activity. So personally, I have no trouble using commercially prepared fleece or scoured fleece, or as you saw, I was using some cameras just about to run out of battery. And we're back. Yes, I personally don't have any problem using pre-prepared fibre. I think it's fantastic to prepare fibre yourself. It's wonderful to have that experience as a spinner of really getting to know a fleece, really getting your hands in the wool when it's greasy, when it's fresh off the sheep, and if you can attend a shearing, that's just, as a spinner, it's amazing to then carry a project all the way through from the sheep to the finished object. Yeah, if I were, for example, to embark on the project of spinning for a jumper, that's a lot of wool, and you know, that would take quite a long time, and that's fine if that's something I want to do. But equally, sometimes I literally just want to come and sit down and spin at my wheel and have the pleasure of the actual spinning itself. So I bring this up because I had a very interesting discussion with a friend over the weekend about whether using combed top was cheating or not as a hand spinner, particularly when you go into the realms of spinning to sell. And I very vehemently defended the opinion that, oh, the little bird's just gone into the window. Yeah, I defended the opinion that I think that there's nothing wrong with using pre-prepared fibre. For me as well, I don't want, oh, and there it is again. It's a little blue tit. No, it's a swallow. Oh. Silly me, it's not a swallow, it's a pied wagtail. Of course, it's too early in the year for swallows. We're only January. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Yes, for me, my wool work, whether it's just for personal pleasure or if eventually I were to start selling my hand-spun yarn, which is something I wanted to do in the past and something I'm thinking really very carefully about at the moment. There's two things I feel are important. The first one is I would want to produce a product that is manageable for me in terms of my health, and then allows me to make a product that is accessible for other people. If I were to prepare yarn from raw fleece, particularly if I owned the animals myself, which is something I would like to do, there's a cost involved in looking after animals, and there's a lot of hours of work before you even sit down at the wheel, and for me, I don't know if you can justify the price of a skein of yarn that would reflect all those hours of work, that makes it accessible for people. So that's the first thing. And for example, this skein of yarn that I spun last week, if I wanted to produce something similar and sell it, it was essentially 2.5 hours of work of actual spinning and then plying and washing, etc., and setting the twist time. Obviously that's not including the time it's spent to order the wool, and then obviously the stages that come after it, but just the product itself. And therefore it would still be quite an expensive product, but I think it would be comparable to skeins of hand painted or dyed yarn, naturally dyed or acid dyed. So I think that could be a possibility. And then the other thing for me that's really important is I would want my wool work to not be a little island in a big sea of where I'm isolated and I'm trying to do everything myself. For me, part of what attracts me to wool work in France is that there are a really there's a really blossoming or re-blossoming wool industry, a kind of renaissance of spinning mills, mini mills, shepherds who are interested in the fibre as well as the animal, or the milk or the meat. There's knitters, there's natural dyers, there's weavers, there's carders, there's felt makers, and I love the idea of being one stitch in a row of stitches in an enormous piece of knitted community. And so for me, for example, to buy carded prepped wool from a felt maker in Brittany, that helps me support his work. That means his business is still working, his activity as a shearer is still working, the local breeds that are supplying the wool are still being kept, and yeah, for me it's all about community. That was really what attracted me to the idea quite soon after I began spinning as a hobby, to the idea of making it a professional activity, was the fact that there is this network of wool producers and craftspeople around me, not just further afield in France but actually within these mountains that I live in as well. And there is a very strong network of solidarity from each end of the Pyrenees, so the 500 miles of the whole stretch of mountains on the north in France and in the south in Spain. And when I do eventually get around to talking about the Wool Festival that I attended in early December, that is what I went to the Wool Festival for, was to see whether that network is. And if anything, it's just got stronger and bigger and more developed in the years that I was away from the area. And yeah, I just find it really exciting to be part of that. So yeah, anyway, I'm gonna get back to my bobbin, see if I can fill up this bobbin before it's time to go and cook the evening meal. And I look forward to seeing you again really soon, and perhaps next time I'll have a finished sock and maybe some finished yarn, enough with which I'll be able to cast on my first pair of handmade socks of 2022. So I look forward to seeing you again really soon, and I want to wish you a lovely rest of your day, and thank you for taking time with me. Speak again soon. Bye bye. again. So it's a few days later, it's actually Sunday morning, and I've been quite busy over the weekend since I last filmed. I finished spinning up the brown black Ouessant fleece, what was left of it. So I now have 2 bobbins full of lovely singles ready and waiting to be plied. The yarn has come out really consistent, and I think at the right thickness now for making a 2-ply DK weight yarn. That's just to give you a little idea of it. And I've started work now on the white fleece. I actually, while I'm talking, I can just prepare my next bit of fibre to spin. So the carded batt is absolutely enormous. And what I'm doing for finish is I'm stripping it down lengthways. You may have seen me with the black fleece stripping it down widthwise and doing like a zigzag, and I did that because I feel like when I make carded rolags, you then spin from the fibre kind of the width way, but I was really finding the fibre management quite tricky. The fibre itself, the batt, was quite compacted because it's been rolled up and then stored in one of those vacuum plastic bags where you suck the air out, so that's sort of to keep the moths out and also just to not take up so much space. So it was very, very compacted, and I was really having to kind of fluff up the fibre before I used it. Now it's not the same with this one, because although it came from the same place originally, this has been kept in a plastic container with a lid on the last couple of years. So this one's a bit more sort of fluffy and sort of easy to spin with. But yeah, I'm finding that it gives me a really nice long piece of fibre to work with, doing it this way, doing it lengthwise, and I'm not really having to do too much. I'm just slightly I have stripped it in half on some of them, or just sort of opening it up, just so I've got this really nice kind of fluffy load of fibre to spin with. So yeah, I'm just gonna get this ready. Now the other thing that I didn't realise when I pulled it out the other day, it's kind of obvious now I think about it, but it wasn't really obvious at the moment. There's a lot of vegetable matter in this batt. It's sort of quite fine. The camera is picking up a little bit. And some of it is bigger than others. So if I had carded this myself, I probably would have had to have given it a couple more passes, because it's actually quite difficult to spin with it, because I'm having to sort of unpick as much vegetable matter as I can as I spin, and obviously that sort of slows down the spinning process a little bit, or sort of truncates it a little bit. But yeah, and also it's on the bobbin, it's coming out as a kind of off-white yellow, kind of a bit grubby, which I don't know if that's because of the vegetable matter or just because of the colour of the fibre itself. I mean, it's coming out like quite a nice white here, but it is sort of more of an off-white, really. Anyway, so I'm making these little nests, and then I just unravel them and just spin end to end once I'm ready to spin. And yeah, I'm doing quite well. I've just done about half an hour spinning, and I've almost filled up a bobbin. I could probably just spin a little bit more on there. So that's the white. So if I compare that with black, and so I've decided that I'm going to do a mild yarn just to make sure that I've got enough to really make a good pair of socks. So I did on Friday night, when I'd finished filling up the black bobbins, I just had a little bit of fibre left of the black, So I spun those singles, and then I spun up on another bobbin a sort of equivalent amount of white, and I've made a little test, and then I plied them together yesterday morning, and so I've got a little test ball of Miles yarn, and as I said, the white is coming out quite sort of grubby, but once it's plied together it's actually quite nice. And that's the plied yarn. So that, I would say, is coming out as a sort of more of a sports weight, heavy, light DK. If I compare it with the commercial yarn I was using last week, so that's the DK of my last pair of socks, and well, obviously it's a little bit less sort of consistent because it's hand spun. Oh, it's possibly quite similar. Anyway, I say it's a little bit lighter, but it's not too bad. I'm really pleased to see how, you know, I've managed to spin a really consistent 2-ply yarn. So I've actually cast on, well, I was going to do a gauge swatch, and then I thought, well, let's do a gauge swatch in the round, and then I thought, why don't I just cast on a pair of socks and see how it goes. So I cast these on yesterday evening. I was a bit too tired to do any spinning last night, and I'm really happy with how they're knitting up so far. And actually I can see the value of making a sort of a living swatch almost, because you really get a feel for how the yarn is gonna look. So the cuff, I had sort of more white of singles when I did the sample spin, so I just plied the white back on itself. I know you're not supposed to do that, but I think for sampling it's fine. So I made a white cuff, and then I've started the body of the sock, and it's lovely. I love this mild effect, mild effect. So I've got that much left, so I'm gonna just start knitting the sock, and then, you know, once I've finished spinning my singles and then plying it, I'll just keep knitting. And if I have any left over, I do actually think that would make a really nice fingerless mitt as well. So if I have too much, it'll be fine. I'll be really happy to use it. So yeah, so DK weight, hand spun, 2-ply, woolen spun socks on their way. And also been busy with my sock project, so that I just showed you last time. So last time I had already knitted one sock, which you'll have seen by now. I published the weekend I knitted that as a knit with me vlog. So that was sock number 1 that I cast off last Sunday. And so 1 week later, last night, I just finished the toe and I cast off sock number 2. So I have a lovely second pair of DK weight socks. And this pair, so I knit it from one ball of this yarn. So amazingly, I only had this tiny little amount left, even though I made these socks much longer in the leg and then a little bit longer in the foot than the last pair of socks I made. I can just show you to compare. So these are after 2 weeks wear. They're starting to, yeah, they've stretched a bit at the cuff, and they're starting to get a bit dirty on the bottom, and they're also starting to felt a bit on the bottom. But you can see they're much taller, well, a little bit taller, and they are a little bit longer. And when I cast them off, I showed them to my husband, and he said, "Oh, who are those for?" And I said, "Well, they're for me." He looked a bit crestfallen, and then I said, "Oh, but they are a little bit longer than the last pair, so do you want to try them on?" And basically he tried them on, and they're for him now. So I told him he's not allowed to wear them until I've taken a nice photo of them and shown them on the podcast. So yeah, So lots and lots of socks, lots and lots of spinning, and I'd say by probably Tuesday I'll have my sock yarn plied, and I think the official cast on is the 7th for the spin sock, well, for the spin along, the sock spin along. So obviously I have kind of technically casted on, but I probably will just stop and wait now till I finished my yarn. Oh yeah, and the other thing I wanted to say is I really felt a difference of spinning between the first bobbin and the second bobbin. The first bobbin I was filming myself spinning just to show you my technique, the woolen draw technique, and by that evening I continued spinning and I'd spun the second bobbin, and could really feel by the end of the second bobbin my technique had really loosened up. I was feeling much more ease, treadling, much more ease again with the woolen draw, long draw, and even as I had said, I'd sort of worked out better how to manage the fibre off the batt. So it's really encouraging to see that, you know, folks often say to me, oh, you're such a good spinner, how do you spin so well? I'm rubbish, I can't spin. And for me it's just all about practice, and the advantage of doing a project like this that's not too big, like it's not like a big jumpers quantity of yarn, but it, you know, it's quite involved. I'll be interested to weigh how much yarn I have at the end, or of total fibre, because unfortunately my scales have been broken by a small person in my family. So at the moment I'm not able to weigh my fibre. So I would usually weigh out 50 grams per bobbin of fibre, or 100 grams for a total project, or 200 grams. I like to have a know how much I'm starting with, and then obviously I'll weigh it once it's been spun, because there is a little bit of wastage, particularly with this. It's been a while since I've spun with carded wool, and I mean on the floor just behind the camera there's a massive pile of fluff that's just come off, like second cuts and bits of vegetable matter as I'm spinning. So it's definitely a lot of it's a more kind of dirty, kind of hands-on type of spinning. My clothes are very dusty and I need to find I used to have a spinning cloth that I used to put over, so it's quite different from from spinning with combed top, for example, where all of that sort of vegetable matter and the impurities have been removed at the mill. There is waste with combed top, it's just you don't have it as a spinner. So yeah, so just really excited by this project and excited to finish spinning the yarn and get it on the needles. Hopefully by the next time I record I'll be on my way to knitting my first pair of hand-spun socks for 2022. Yeah, so I think I'm gonna get back to the wheel and look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care, bye bye. Hello! So it's the next day and I have a finished skein of yarn. So it all plied up really lovely last night. I finished just before tea time, but I didn't have a chance to record. And I'm really pleased with it. So it hasn't yet had a bath because I just didn't have time in the evening. So it has got a little bit of energy in it, but not too much. And as I said, I didn't over-ply it. Maybe it's not enough really, but I feel like that's appropriate for a woolen spun yarn. But as I said, my plying knowledge is not only rusty but wasn't necessarily very complete to start with anyhow, so I really want to try and find out more about plying this year in terms of yarn management, in terms of treadling and angle of twist and amount of twist, and how to ply when it's a worsted spun, how to ply when it's a woolen spun. Yeah, that's going to be one of my little points to focus on this year, but I'm really excited with it. And I'm excited to finish plying these two. I suspect there's going to be a little bit less in this spin because I feel like these two bobbins were a little bit less full than this one. But I finished up with I would call that a sports weight yarn, and I don't know how much it weighs. It feels like it's 100 grams or not far off. I suspect that you can get 100 grams on 50 grams onto each of these bobbins. I'll be looking forward to weighing it before I cast on, but I've ended up with a finished meterage before washing of 330 meters. So yeah, almost all ready to cast on for my pair of socks. Yeah, the spin along portion of the sock along is finishing on the 7th of February, sorry, and then there's going to be a cast on party, so really excited to get this on my needles very soon, but I am going to try and finish plying this beforehand. So I'm going to sign off there and wish you a lovely end to your weekend, and yeah, let me know if you are participating in the sock knit along, spin knit along below. Some of you have told me, so that's really great, and yeah, can't wait to see what you'll be casting on really soon. Take care and see you again soon. Bye bye.